What if I told you that my classless system for my Warcraft TTRPG had more classes than World of Warcraft? How does that work? Well, it's really pretty simple. As I've said previously, we do not have any sort of spell lists. If you say you can do it, you can do it. There are just certain limitations the system imposes on everyone. For example, you have one reaction per round, and you can use this reaction to interrupt an enemy or tank the damage for someone else. And you have to use these reactions wisely and plan if you won't need that reaction later. Or mana, normally, does not regenerate on its own, unlike energy. But what if certain characters could get specific perks that let them subvert these system limitations? For example, what if warriors could tank multiple times per round, limited only by their own health? Or what if mages had their mana slowly regenerate when they're not using it? That became the basis of what we ended up calling class traits for our system. And I'm here to tell you, we ended up making a lot more classes than WoW has, and each of them is more than just its class trait. Each of them represent a unique class concept, and I want to tell you about them today. What you should be seeing in front of you right now is a table of various classes and what they represent in terms of their power source and their combat role. Now, for those of you who have been around the TTRPG and D&D scenes for long enough, this might remind you a little bit of something, and that is the D&D 4th edition class system. Now, I know this might be an unpopular opinion in the sphere, but I actually kinda liked 4E. I don't know, maybe it's just something about my messed up brain that likes this methodical categorization, putting things neatly into rows in a table. I liked how you could sort the classes into these power sources and combat styles. And yes, I hear you that it might look a bit artificial if you try to force filling these gaps, and they haven't done this perfectly, admittedly. But I liked the idea of it. Funny story, in 4E there was no martial controller, that is, a character class focused on using physical, non-magical abilities and focused on crowd control. So many people had different ideas of what this missing class could be. I have, once, jokingly said that this class should be called douchebag, because if you're not using magic, how are you doing the crowd control? Well, you're yelling at people. And what do you call someone who stands around and instead of fighting, hurls insults at people? Douchebag. And that joke post got censored, removing the word douchebag and killing the joke completely, and got me warned on the official D&D forums because apparently they were meant for 5-year-olds at the time. But that's just a funny aside about WotC moderation over a decade ago. Gods, I'm getting old. So, my classless class system rewards players for sticking to specific lore concepts, be they canonical Warcraft classes, my own reimaginings of them, or my wholly custom classes, while still giving them the freedom of their own interpretations of what their unique character can do. And there is multiclassing, where you can pick multiple of those. The only limitations on multiclassing are things like being allowed up to 3 class traits normally, and then getting additional slots as you grow in AP or power. And I wanted to introduce you to the general overview of what some of these classes are and what they can do. In the first row, you'll see some of the most basic and most popular classes that probably don't need much introduction. Warriors are weapon-based bruisers who are your basic physical combatants, and their class trait allows them to tank multiple times per round, limited only by their own health. Rogues are weapon-based, rogues. This category of combat style representing an agile, sometimes squishy melee fighter. The standard rogue's class trait is Shadow Dance, allowing them to keep their stealth bonuses for their full round instead of just the first action. And finally, hunters are the weapon-based rangers, having lost some of the more magical abilities WoW hunters have, focusing on their weapons and their pets, their class trait allowing their pets to do more reactions that normal pets can do. You might also notice more classes in this row that are completely custom. Brawlers are sort of weapon-based monks, who do not have any elemental or mystical powers. Their class trait is improvised weapons, allowing them to roll weapon conjuration to determine their damage, representing grabbing improvised weapons and hitting people with that, be they chair legs, stones, or tree branches. Medics are probably pretty simple and self-explanatory, focusing on healing people and through more mundane, non-magical means. While the class trait gives them a heal of opportunity, a big part of their class identity is healing weapons. Weapons that, instead of doing damage, have a set healing value, like Mercy Staff in Overwatch. The last class in this row is called Dragon Slayer, and I might rename it someday. But the idea was, it mixes the concept of Earth's dragon-slaying knights, Jaradin Dragon Slayers, and Dragonmaw Orcs. These are the scrappy, trickstery physical individuals who prefer ranged weapons and poisons and keep an arsenal of low-tech tools to bring down even the toughest foes. Their class trait is what I call the Wing Clipper, and they can target flying units, such as dragons, with little penalties regardless of range. The problem with filling the weapon caster slot was the same as filling the martial controller slot in D&D 4e, and no, I didn't make it the douchebag class. It's a hard concept to mix together, but I think I did an acceptable way of going about it. The next row is the tech classes, something that is woefully underrepresented in WoW, despite the ample lore of it. The two biggest classes here are Tinkers and Alchemists, two classes very present in Warcraft lore, but neglected in the MMO, because devs are afraid of adding more classes with guns or something. Tinkers can really fill multiple slots on the table, being very versatile, like druids. They can have many different armor types and weapons, including guns, chainsaws, and flamethrowers. Their class trait is improvisation, allowing them to create a new limited charge bonus action by quickly tinkering out something useful just for this encounter. Alchemists mix a bit of the Warcraft 3 Goblin Alchemist with the Pathfinder Alchemist, focusing on throwing potions and poisons at people. Their class trait is called Mutagens, where they can use their alchemy skill at the start of combat to make themselves a buff. The two weirder classes here are Gearheads and Steam Warriors. They represent some of the typically more sci-fi character concepts, but ones which can still be represented in Warcraft lore thanks to its steampunkish tech. Gearheads are essentially augments of a sort, people who replaced parts of their bodies with technology, like steampunk arms or mechanical eyes. Steam Warriors, on the other hand, ride large mech suits, and if the suit is defeated, they can drop out of it in a much weaker form and try to repair it. A little bit like Diva, or half the goblin bosses in the game. The two classes you will recognize in the elemental row are Shamans and Monks. I feel like most people don't realize that monks use elemental magic. Not just because of the fire and lightning parts, but because also their key is lore-wise the same as the fifth element of spirit. And in my system, monks can freely upgrade both of their fists separately as natural weapons, gaining more damage as they grow more powerful. Shamans, on the other hand, also need little introduction, but they can use reincarnation, once per day getting back up after going down. I also put evokers mainly here as elemental casters because, at least in my imagining, dragons use elemental magic the same way shamans do, by using it more peaceably, instead of the forced binding of arcane users. To make evokers, our evokers feel like WoW evokers, they can freely split any overkill damage into healing and vice versa. We already had the channeling abilities available for everyone, so I did not use that part. Also important to add here is that our evokers aren't all the Dracthyr evokers, because you can have evokers really for many sorts of powers. You can have like a Fel evoker, a character who was born with a Fel power. The evoker part meaning merely that you are channeling some innate power in yourself, and that power can come from many sources. While evokers primarily categorized as elemental, they can be anywhere in any sort of power source. Because of that, implementation as essentially the WoW sorcerers here. The new elemental classes not present in WoW, but based on prior lore, are Witch Doctors, Shadow Hunters, and Blade Masters. Witch Doctors are supposed to be these elemental priests before their spells got stolen by a few other classes in WoW. They prefer to wear cloth and use primarily spirit and decay magic to heal or harm. Shadow Hunters are in some way Witch Doctors with a bow, having abandoned most of their healing to focus more on damage and curses. Both got fairly unique class traits. Witch Doctors gain an effigy, and can use a bonus action to bind that effigy to a unit, friendly or hostile, and then ignore any range or line of sight penalties to that unit, using their spells on the voodoo doll to affect the bound target. Shadow Hunters, on the other hand, are surrounded by an aura of big bad voodoo, which imparts debuffs on the enemies in range. Blade Masters are something from the old lore that I find most people don't realize they had magic. In the RTS games, they could use wind magic to speed themselves up or to make illusions. So, my Blade Master class focuses on the agile melee fighter plus elemental magic. Their class trait allows them to better use the reflect action, slashing back at enemies attempting to attack them. The last class here is the Earth Warder, which is originally based on the ESO Dragon Knight. I found that the way that class played, at least with its magical skills, actually fit the WoW lore and mechanics quite well. Here, the Earth Warders are either draconic or elemental defenders, using elemental magic in conjunction with heavy armor and weapons, becoming a walking, roaring inferno. In the next row, you'll find the Holy or Divine classes. Paladins and priests, once again, need no introduction. Everyone who is watching this presumably knows what they're about. Paladins get to use their divine protection as a class trait, sacrificing their offensive action to gain invulnerability from enemy attacks, like the old paladin bubble, which made them unable to attack. Holy and disciplined priests simply gain atonement, healing one of their shielded targets with their attacks. Priestess of the Moon is probably the only class here that is present in canon lore, but not as a class in WoW. Here she is a holy ranger, using holy magic for healing and protection in tandem with a bow. Her class trait is Divine Intervention, which actually was first created to convert D&D clerics into our system. And I like to think it's a pretty ingenious ability. Basically, for a chapter or a day in the story, you roll 3 percentile dice and keep those results. And once per day, you can choose to use one of these dice instead of the actual roll someone got, getting a once per day free out-of-jail card. Because your god, in this case a loon, intervenes on your behalf. The rest of the classes in this row are pretty much completely original. The first one, called the Demigod, is not as crazy as powerful as it sounds, especially since it uses the same system as the others. Demigods also get the Divine Intervention, and their primary fighting style is supposed to be monk-like, preferring to punch people. They were first created for Warcraft Earth to represent the children of Greek or Norse gods, or Egyptian pharaohs, or Hindu avatara, running around with great potential for power, but having to work for recognition in the medieval world. Later, I incorporated them into Azeroth as mortal avatars of titanic keepers, imparted with a tiny sliver of their divine sparks. Inquisitors are the holy rogues of the system. Instead of hiding, they prefer to dual-wield and quickly move around the field, either through flash-stepping around or simply by being empowered by light to be very fast. Their class trait is a mark, allowing them to keep sight of a single target no matter what, tracking them through holy insight as an inquisitor. Mystics were a fairly late addition, and they are on the verge of holy and arcane magic. They are the primary holy casters or holy mages, also being holy summoners, summoning angelic beings. Their chief talents lie in copying the knowledge of others. Their class trait, called Henosis, or unity in Greek, embraces the idea of light wanting to unite the universe. The mystic can use it to copy, for the day, the class trait of another character. And even outside of the class trait, mystics like to copy the proficiencies of other characters, be they friendly or hostile, to then use their spells as proficiently as they did. The Thaumaturge class was largely inspired by the Pathfinder class of the same name. Much like the Pathfinder Thaumaturge, these guys are exemplary monster hunters. They like to gather all sorts of stuff, silver, special oils, holy water, and it's represented in the resource called Esoterica. Now, when they use a powered attack, using that Esoterica, they will always do it as if they triggered that enemy's specific weakness, like a werewolf's weakness to silver, or a demon's weakness to holy magic, because they just happen to have what they needed on them. And even outside of their class trait, they can inflict and create new vulnerabilities into creatures. And this is the part where I realize this is taking a lot of time to explain everything. So I will split it into 2 parts, a few days from now, with a second part, where we will take a look into Shadow, Arcane, Fel, Nature, and Death classes. I hope to see you there. Perhaps these videos will give you some ideas to incorporate into your games. And meanwhile, I'll be off, and I will see you next time.